a welcome to you all. I wanted to start, if I may, Chancellor, with the comments that were made by the Chief Secretary and repeated by you last week about comparing welfare recipients and children's pocket money. And I wonder if, on reflection, you think that was a wise comparison to make.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here at your Select Committee today, Chair, and to members of the committee. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury has apologised for the clumsy language that he used. It wasn't the right language. I was asked a specific question. I did not, first of all, hear the previous interview of the Chief Secretary, and so the question to me was put about pocket money, but it's not a right analogy, and apologies have already been made.
Okay, so you're making an apology too for the comments that you made on the other...
I don't think I made the same comments, but the analogy of comparing pocket money and personal independence payments is clearly not right.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Chancellor, you've made it clear already in today's evidence how much you value the work of the Office for Budget Responsibility, the IMF and the independent economists who helped sort of frame the UK guardrails effectively. And I note that in their Article 4 examination of the UK economy last year, which was published on the 1st of July, the IMF said this about the UK economy. It said, growth is recovering faster than expected, inflation has fallen rapidly to target. And then you became Chancellor on the 5th of July, and the budget came out at the end of October. And I was very struck by the difference between the report that the Office for Budget Responsibility put out last October and the one that was published last week with your spring statement. In those 5 months, their forecast for inflation this year has gone from 2.6% to 3.2%. Obviously, you highlighted the fact that their growth forecast has halved from 2% to 1%. They're also expecting UK borrowing, to be £47.5 billion higher in the forecast period. They're expecting unemployment to go from 4.1% to 4.5%, despite the welfare reforms that were announced alongside the spring statement. They're expecting debt interest to be over £30 billion higher over the next 5 years. They're expecting, at the end of the forecast period, for there to be more children in poverty than in their last report. This is also awful April. Bills are going up for households across the country. We've got tariffs that are no doubt being announced later today. I just wondered to what extent you recognise now that business confidence and consumer confidence took a real hit after your budget in October.
Well, you started by talking about the IMF, and the IMF were very supportive of what we did in the budget last year to put the public finances back on a firm footing. And they were also very supportive of the fiscal rules that we announced, both to bring stability to the public finances, but also to unlock private investment. So I was very appreciative of the support both from Kristalina Georgieva and Gita Gopinath at the IMF for the work that we are doing to bring stability back to the economy, and through our modern supply side approach to bring growth back. And you mentioned the OBR forecasts around growth for this year. Well, as you will well know, the OECD and others have downgraded a range of countries in the G7 and the developed world. But the OBR have also revised up growth in 2026, 2027, 28 and 29, and they forecast that by the end of the forecast period, the economy will be bigger than they forecast the Conservatives' last budget, and indeed bigger than they forecast the budget that I delivered last autumn. So if you take it in the round, the OBR are saying the economy will be bigger. They put that down to the planning reforms that we've instigated, and the IMF have welcomed what we did at the budget last year.
But Chancellor, the IMF, as you rightly say, you are following a lot of the recommendations in their Article 4 report on the UK economy. You must acknowledge, you cannot deny the reality that since October last year and the spring statement, growth in this economy, the confidence of businesses, the confidence of consumers has been considerably worse than you were hoping for when you announced that budget? I mean, you must be able to see that.
Well, I absolutely accept that there are costs of any policy, whether it's on spending or tax, but there are also costs of irresponsibility. And just imagine if last October I hadn't have taken the action that we did, to put the public finances on a firm footing, to put more money into the NHS, which has seen for 5 months in a row NHS waiting lists fall, and 2 million additional appointments in the National Health Service, reducing those record waiting lists that were bequeathed to us by the previous government, but also because we've brought stability back to the economy. When the world changed, as it undoubtedly has these last few months, we were able to uplift the spending we put into defence to take it to 2.5% of GDP within just 2 years, the biggest sustained increase in defence spending.
Away money from the international development budget.
Yes, but if we hadn't have made those decisions last October in the budget, there would have been other demands on those budgets. So, you say only by doing that, I'm afraid your party had 14 years to put more money into defence, and
I'm
that money fell on defence spending.
I'm genuinely interested in the decisions you have taken since you've become Chancellor. And what I'm not hearing is, in terms of these economic statistics since your budget last October, is anything that has got better in terms of these economic numbers.
Now, another lever that's suggested is tax. So, first suggestion is a wealth tax, which would take time and obviously be complicated to implement. What's the Treasury's thoughts on a wealth tax at the minute?
I'd just say on that, in the budget last year, we increased sort of two sort of broad types of tax. We increased national insurance on business, which we've already discussed. We also increased taxes on the most wealthy. The reforms to the non-dom tax status will bring in £12 billion during the course of this Parliament. VAT on private schools would bring in £9 billion during the course of this Parliament. The energy profits levy on the large profits, the energy companies making £2.3 billion. The higher rate additional dwelling on stamp duty, land tax, £1.2 billion. And the thing that these sort of taxes are the capital gains tax increase, £8.9 billion. Inheritance tax changes about just over £5 billion. The point is these taxes, by their nature, fall on more wealthy people. And so my argument would be that we did already increase significantly taxes on the wealthiest in the budget last year. Now the focus has got to be on growing the economy and reform of public services, as well as spending wisely the additional investment, including the £25 billion into the NHS in this Parliament.
And another tax suggestion people make is on council tax and revaluation or additional bans. See that from the IFS and others. What are the current Treasury thinking on that?
Well, look, some councils wanted to significantly increase their council tax this month, and we have resisted calls from a number of councils, including Windsor and Maidenhead and Slough, who wanted to increase their council tax significantly, because we do recognise the ongoing pressures on living standards and the cost of living crisis that people have gone through. So, we want taxes on working people to be as low as possible. It's why, despite the difficult decisions in the budget last year, working people in their pay slips won't be paying any additional tax.
And any thoughts on more fundamental reform, or is that for another day?
That's not something that we're looking at the moment.
I think there is consensus on that. Change does need to happen. But I guess it's the timing and the scale that people are questioning. You commissioned Sir Charlie Mayfield to do a review into this. The spring statement measures come ahead of that. So that feels, I'm sure you'll come to address that. And also the main driver of the saving seems to be restricting eligibility for PIP, personal independence payments. Now, 800,000 people could be set to lose out from that. Around a third of all PIP claimants are in work anyway. But presumably, if you're going to be tightening eligibility for PIP, that's going to target the sorts of people that are more ready for work already. So it doesn't seem like there's a huge proportion of people that are going to get back into work as a result of that measure. So could you explain that for us, please?
First of all, the work that Charlie Mayfield's doing, really important work, is about helping keep people in the labour market rather than supporting people who are not in the labour market. So they're sort of a bit different, but Charlie Mayfield's doing a really important piece of work for us, and we do know that the best thing we can do is to help people stay in work, because once they drop out, it is much harder to get people back into work, which is why I've asked Charlie to do that piece of work for us. You're right that the reforms around PIP are around the eligibility, so you'll need to get a minimum of 4 points in one category to get onto personal independence payments. Since the pandemic, the cost of health and disability benefits has gone up by £20 billion. And left unchecked, by the end of this Parliament, it will be another £20 billion a year on sickness and disability benefits. The changes we're making will still see the amount spent on these benefits rise substantially by £16 billion, so a little bit less than the rise that's already in
the
place.
stated purpose of reforms is to get more people back into work.
Yeah.
Many PIP claimants are already in work, and others probably are unable to work permanently. So of the 800,000 that look like they're set to lose out on PIP claimants going forward, saved by the bell. Can I complete the question? Yeah, so the 800,000 that are set to lose out, what proportion of those would you expect to get back into work?
Well,
And I think we'll actually have to pause for the vote.
You've got a lot of time to think about the answer.
Exactly. Order.
In your chart 1.1 in the Treasury document published alongside the Spring Statement, it specifically spells out that the autumn budget measures in terms of crowding out and employer national insurance have actually reduced the UK economy. Surely you can accept that it's your measures that have had some of this impact in terms of the deteriorating statistics that I've mentioned since October.
Chancellor.
So I've said that, of course, there are always costs to any policy on tax or spending, but there is also a cost of the counterfactual. And the counterfactual would have been leaving the public finances on an unfirm footing to embed the instability that was bequeathed to us by the previous government, and it would also have meant further increases in NHS hospital waiting lists. So we increased national insurance contributions and we put £25 billion extra investment into our National Health Service. We think that was the right priority. Now, other people would say, no, don't put more money into the NHS, and that is absolutely their right to say that. If you want more money into our NHS to reduce waiting times, and we have now for 5 months reduced NHS waiting lists with 2 million additional appointments, if you would prefer not to put that money into the NHS, you're absolutely at liberty to say that, but you have to be honest, because if you want that extra money, you have to support the taxes to pay for it.
Well, we can monitor the impact of that as time goes by, but in terms of the number that you just cited to this committee, which was the £500 a year extra in real household disposable income, could you just help the committee out, because I wondered which official document that's actually published in?
Well, it's from the OBR numbers, and I already have given that answer to Yuan Yang. So if you take the spring budget from the previous Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and you look at the OBR's forecasts for real household disposable income in that forecast, and you compare it to the forecast that they published last week, and you look at RHDI per year, every year, and you look at the contrast between those two,
so it's
you average
£500 per year per household.
as I already have said in the previous answer, it is the average. So some years it's more than 500, some years it's less. 500 is the average additional RHDI for the spring statement I delivered last week compared to the last budget that the Conservatives delivered. And in that time, the OBR forecast that on average RHDI per person will be £500 more now because of the actions we've taken compared to the plans bequeathed to me by the previous government.